Okay, Mr. Mayor, we are now live. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Welcome, everybody. It's a great, beautiful June night. I'll start off with reading the first recommendation that Section 2.4 of the Township Electronic Participation Policy COU 02-2020 regarding recording of all votes by the clerk or their delegate be waived for the duration of this meeting, and that all votes, including procedural and main motions, be taken by a show of hands. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Colburn, second by Councillor Pringle. Is there any discussion on the motion before us? Welcome, Councillor Thompson. A show of hands, all in favor of the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
The motion is carried. Moving on with our agenda, approval of the agenda. Would any member like to make any additions to the agenda here tonight? Madam Clerk, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to add a discussion regarding Township COVID-19 regulations in response to moving into step 1 of the reopening plan on Friday. And I would like to add that to new business, please.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Please remind me because I'll probably forget. If there's no other items to agenda.
Mr. Mayor, if I may interrupt, Councillor Thompson has his hand raised.
Go ahead, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's not an addition to the agenda. I just want to let you and my colleagues know that I'm on call. So if you see me suddenly disappear from the screen for an emergency, I'll leave my video off and then I'll come back.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. The recommendation is that the agenda be approved as presented. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Deputy Mayor Carlton, second by Councillor Barfoot. Is there any discussion on the motion before us? A show of hands, all in favor, please. The motion is carried. We're moving on for our agenda. Declaration of community interest and clear anytime you see fit during a meeting. We no public hearings, no delegations, no correspondence. We're down to staff reports. Our first staff report is, I'll read the recommendation. That report OPS 2021-23 regarding 2020 building condition assessments be received for information. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Thompson, second by Councillor Pringle. Mr. Dolmar, you want to speak to these reports, please?
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Committee of the Whole members today. I just wanted to bring forward for your information that in 2020, Township of Georgian Bluffs did a building condition assessment of all their buildings within the township. Right now, as you'll see within the report, there's 9 buildings listed. The one that is not listed is the Kemble Arena. That is going to be coming forward at the July 14th Committee of the Whole as part of the Kemble Arena big overall project, because that's what was applied for the grant and all that. So that's part of that project. All the other buildings that are owned within the township have been incorporated into this master plan of we're looking at doing a 10-year forecast of our capital assets within each facility for upgrades for ID, for example, the HVAC system, windows, doors, seals around the doors. So this kind of gives council a full broad understanding of what has been reviewed out on each site. Each report is very detailed and with lots of photos and stuff. It was in compliance to E 2018-15 ASTM standards. It was conducted. They were finalized in September of 2020 last year. So I just thought I'd bring this forward as for information for council to see. And we're also going to be building our 10-year capital forecast off this as well, so that we can, maximize the best value for our dollars. So all the windows are going to be done together instead of them being spread over the next 10 years. We're going to try to make sure that we incorporate all the assets together that we can do for better bang for our buck. The other thing too is whatever is a health and safety issue, we will be working on those first to get those out of the way, to get them cleaned up and put us back in compliance. But it kind of gives us a structure when we do present a budget to council over the next 10 years of, this is how much we're looking to spend per year. And we figured it out to be roughly about $387,000, just so that everybody is kind of fully aware over the next 10 years, this is what's going to be required to invest into these assets to keep them up to life and producing our better products for our employees and also for the residents of the township.
Thank you, Steve. Great reports. Nice to see them come. Does council have any questions? Deputy Mayor Carlton.
Just curious as to how these are being financed. Is this coming from reserves for buildings? Because I would take it we want to get started on some of these this year and not put it off till the next budget year.
So through you, Mayor Burley, to Deputy Mayor Carlton, a lot of the projects that were proposed in 2021 or 2021 are actually part of this from the BCA. So the stuff that was approved by council through the tax levies and reserves to fund them has been incorporated. But if there's more financial questions, I can defer to the Director of Finance for further clarity.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Any comments?
My comment would be is right now, this is just for information. So it's basically so we can develop a 10-year capital plan in order to determine and prioritize the projects. Next step is determining the funding for these projects. We will try to apply for grants as much as we can to help us assist us working through this list. Otherwise, we will continue to prioritize and tackle these things as funds become available through whether it be taxation, reserves, or grant funding.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Does council have any other comments or questions? Grant, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, just more of a note or an observation I guess I've made myself there. Obviously, the 2020 numbers that were in there for repairs that need to be made, obviously none of them would have been done. So we're really looking at we're 2 years behind then. Is that, would I be assuming that correctly?
Steve, you care to answer that?
So the numbers from 2020 were generated for September of 2020, what is outstanding. Some of the items were brought forward to some of the staff when they were doing some of the work in 2020. So some of the minor repairs were done. 2021, we've also incorporated some of our projects from this BCA as well. And then also we'll be playing catch up a little bit here and there on some items. But like I said, we'll be kind of grouping everything together so that we do get the better bang for the price of it instead of trying to do one-offs here and there.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Can everybody hear me? My computer went dead. Okay. If there's no other questions on the motion before us or any comments, I'll ask for a vote. All in favor of the motion before us? A show of hands, please. The motion is carried. Moving on. Our next recommendation is that memo report OPS 2021-25 entitled Sydenham Conservation Foundation Child Lake Property Follow-up be received for information only. Someone to move it, put it on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Barfoot, second by Councillor Pringle. Mr. Domar, you want to speak to this first?
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Mayor, to Committee of the Whole, I just wanted to present the memo report on the Sydenham Conservation Foundation. This was a request from Council in December 9th, 2020, last year, to follow up with doing more signage and kind of meet with the Conservation Authority and also the Sydenham Conservation Foundation to, promote what's going on at the Shallow Lake area there. Staff have met several times on this over the last few months before we kind of opened up in the summer season here. There's lots of signage has been implemented. Great Conservation is kind of monitoring the area. we are kind of making sure that we are protecting our assets as well. We do have some new signage up on our trails to, mitigate some of the issues that were going on with, people boating in the area on the lakes and stuff like that, and then using our property to get to this property as well. So we kind of had follow up. We are kind of keeping a close eye on what's going on out there. But right now, with all the new signage and making sure everybody's aware of what's going on, that is where we're kind of going with that forward with this process. The other thing too is once the COVID restrictions are lifted, we are going to have space at the Shallow Lake Arena for them to post some signage, some photos as well of the lake and the history of it, so that people, when they are traveling through the arena, they'll be able to see that kind of documentation and see as well. So we're kind of doing that more promotional of information going back and forth as well.
Thank you, Steve. Does council have any questions? Comments? Seeing none, great report. A show of hands, all in favor of her recommendation? The motion is carried. Thank you. Moving on, civil operations. So our next recommendation is that report OPS 2021-27 entitled Churchside Road East Drainage Improvements be received, and the council authorized staff to engage GM Blue Plan Engineering Limited on a single source basis to design, tender, provide construction management and final inspection of the Church Side Road East ditch improvements and culvert replacement at an upset limit of $40,000 to be funded from the General Roads Reserve. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Deputy Mayor Carlton, second by Councillor Barfoot. Steve, you wish to speak to this report?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to committee of the whole members. This report was brought for your approval to use some money out of general reserves to improve the drainage along Church Street all the way down to the water edge there, just past Bombing Beach Road. During the peer review of the Davenport subdivision, along with comments received from the public meetings of the Davenport subdivision, it has become evident that there has been a drainage concern along Church Side Road East and requires improvements to accommodate the flows coming off the new Davenport subdivision. So the construction of the proposed improvements will be incorporated into the Davenport subdivision agreement as well to allow for the subdivision to proceed with the next steps. Currently, the township has hired GM Blue Plan to provide peer review services to the planning department for the Davenport subdivision, as the existing staff complement at the time did not have the expertise to review the drawings. So this is just to improve the drainage along Church Street to allocate the water that is coming off the Davenport new proposed subdivision to increase our culverts at the bottom or Bombing Beach where it crosses, and then allows us to have a significant or proper flow into, instead of it going onto our roadway.
Thank you, Steve. Comments or questions from council? It's sure nice to see this happening, Steve. It's been long overdue. It's nice to see it happen. If there's no questions or comments from council, I'll ask for a vote on the recommendation. All those in favor of the recommendation, show of hands, please. The motion is carried. And we're down to our last operation report. That report OPS 2021-28 entitled Vacant Landfill Building be received for information. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Thompson, second by Councillor Colburn. Steve, you wish to speak to this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to committee of the whole members. Just thought I'd bring forward this report for your information. This is in regards to the vacant landfill building. This was asked at the January 28th, 2020 budget meeting to bring back a report to council to explain the reasons of keeping the building or demoing the building. At this time, staff have been using the building as a cold storage facility. It is in great repair. No issues are really there. Some minor repairs to be done to the floor base with some granulars for our cold storage. But when we're doing winter operations, we do move our equipment over to the vacant landfill building, use it for cold storage so that we have space to park our plows. We are still in compliance with our current ECA and also with our Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks permit that was, closed with the 2017 landfill. So in 2017, you got council did agree to close the landfill, and this building was just kind of sitting vacant. And this is why staff have kind of reused it and repurposed it for more of a storage facility for extra equipment so that it doesn't weather over the time of during the winter season. It's not sitting out in the open. And then also it's, it's ready to go for next season. So we are hoping to continue with that process of using the building as such as cold storage during the winter season. And also with our winter beer, we put it in there to store for the summer so that we don't have anywhere from the heat and all that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Dolmer. Any questions of our Director of Operations? Seeing none? A show of hands, all in favor of the recommendation. It is carried. We're now down to finance. Our first recommendation is that report.
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Madam Clerk.
apologies for the interruption. I'm wondering if before we move on to the finance portion of our agenda, if we can, through your chair, invite the Director of Operations to provide an update both to council and the public regarding the Sutakrity Heights boat launch or water access point report that was formerly scheduled for this evening, but has been deferred to the June 16th council meeting.
Yes, by all means, Madam Clerk. Mr. Dolmar, are you prepared for this?
Yes, I am, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to council. Just thought I'd bring it forward, just an update. We did have a public meeting back in May where we said we would bring a report to Committee of the Whole on today's date, June 9th, with all the growing public information that we received from the surveys and also with some previous inputs from our reports and other items that have come up. We're going to bring the report on June 16th, next meeting at council, to present to council, and also the public is invited to attend as well, just to see the next steps of what we're going to do with the water access point at Sutakrity Heights.
Thank you, Steve. So we'll look forward to your report. So we'll move on to our agenda now. We're down to finance. The recommendation is that report FIN 2021-16 Township Grant and Donation Policy be received, and the policy FIN 01-2021 Township Grant and Donation Policy be approved. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Barfoot, second by Councillor Colburn. Madam Treasurer, you wish to speak to this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So at council's direction, I have put together more of a formal process for the township granting cash donations as well as donations in kind. Sorry, Councillor Barfoot, did you have a question already?
Carol, go ahead. No.
No, just for when you're finished your presentation.
Okay, sorry, thank you. So I've put together this formal process for donations, both cash and donations in kind, so that we can all see the bigger picture, or, see everything that's being requested as once, as opposed to the more of the ad hoc process that we have been using in the past. So what we are proposing to do is each year to open up the application process. So in August, we would advertise through the newspaper, through local media, through our website, through signage, that we are now accepting applications for municipal grants and donations. All applications must be received prior to September 30th. Staff will then evaluate the applications and present them to council for review and approval. It will be up to council to determine how much cash donations you would like to issue each year, as well as the number of donations in kind. And that's really important too, because it does take, staff time away from other projects if we are donating labor or equipment or whatever it may be to community groups and local organizations. So that application process will close September 30th. A report will be presented to council, basically detailing who met the qualifications It'll be up to council to set the limit for what will be granted, and then those applications will be approved through the budgeting process. We've set a bit of criteria about the type of organizations that will be prioritized through this policy. Our priority will be nonprofit organizations that provide a service that we currently do not provide to our residents through municipal services. For-profit organizations could still be eligible for these donations, but they need to demonstrate to us that they're providing a service that we do not provide and that the community needs. Under this policy, the other thing that will be required is for recipients, successful applicants, to make a delegation to council and tell us about their organization and why they need these funds. The other thing that we will do is after the event is over, we would like a report back to council on the success of the event and other information such as how the funds were spent, the number of participants, and specifically the number of participants that you can attribute to Georgian Bluffs. This process will definitely make it clear to the public as well as council and staff on who's receiving these donations and why, and it just adds a much needed level of transparency through this process. I think there are further details in my report, but I don't think we need to discuss them. But if council has any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Councillor Barfoot, I see your virtual hand was up. Did you have a question? You're muted, Carol.
Actually, I have a couple. Thank you, Cassandra. That's a good report and it's well overdue. I just have a couple questions. Now, does that mean our subsidizing various sports, they'll have to apply every year too?
When you mean subsidizing sports, do you mean like the donation of ice time, etc.?
Well, ice time and so much a player if they're playing out of our area.
No. So the amounts we pay to families who have to pay the non-resident fee out of areas, that would not apply to this. If an organization is requesting us to waive rental fees, whether it be for ice time or for use of our community center, they will need to apply through this process.
Okay. I'm not opposed to anything in particular, but what bothers me is when people, they seem to be coming forward more and more every year. And I know everyone is having a hard time, you know, raising money right now. But for example, I always think twice if there's double dipping involved. For example, if they're getting a grant or applying for money from the county, I want to know that because we're part of the county. So I think that's important. I also think it's important if they're getting government funding or funding on a regular basis from anywhere, because we may have others in need as well. So those are things that really concern me when they come forward. I want to know the history of it. I want to know how many participants from our municipality. I'm not being hard-hearted. I'm just trying to be fair.
Good comments, Councillor Barfoot. Madam Treasurer, you have a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Councillor Barfoot, if you look at the application form, those are some of the questions we ask when evaluating their application. Specifically, we do ask what their other sources of funding are, and that will answer that question. I'm just taking a look at the application. And there is a question that asks, is your group based in Georgian Bluffs and how does it support Georgian Bluffs residents? So we do ask that question as well to ensure that it does tie back to our community.
Okay, follow up, Councillor Barfoot, before we go to Councillor Coburn. No?
No, nothing that I want to discuss at this time.
Thank you, Carol. Councillor Coburn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to our Director of Finance and possibly other staff. I'm wondering if we, given keeping in mind that we're donating other people's money, so we're donating the taxpayers' money, do we have a sense from our ratepayers that they support our municipality giving away money to nonprofits or not-for-profits? And I wonder if that's something that we should be polling our ratepayers about. I am aware that other municipalities have a policy where they don't donate to nonprofits at all. So for me, I want to make sure we're spending the ratepayers' money in a way that they would support. So that's my first question and comment. And Cassie, if I may, my second one is, given that we are spending our ratepayers' money in a donation kind of a way, can we not have a couple of members of our ratepayers groups or the community at large sit in on the committee with staff to help us determine the priorities for donations for that year? I would like to see more citizen engagement in that process, given that it's their money that we're giving away. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Colburn. Madam Treasurer, any comments before I go to the Deputy Mayor?
So in regards to your first question, I am not aware of any polling that has taken place to determine if our residents are for or against this kind of program. If it's council's wish, we can put some polling out there, through our website, should you want that feedback. As for establishing a committee, it is an option. I'm just presenting one process where, staff would compile those applications. The information would still go to council to make the final decision. So it's not like staff are making the decision. Basically, what I would be doing is eliminating anybody from the process that did not meet the qualifications or were late in the deadline. So, if council wants to look at establishing committee, that is your choice, and you can make that decision.
Thank you, Cassie. Councillor Colburn, follow-up?
Yes, thank you for that response. Perhaps we can look at a poll to ask our ratepayers if this is something they support for next year or the following year, or even in the new term of council. I am in favor of having a committee with ratepayer representation on that. I think it's important, given that this is a use of their money, that they have some input into that. So I would support that.
Thank you, Councillor Colburn. Deputy Mayor Carleton, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just trying to remember some of the things that we have donated to in the past. And part of that would be, I think on that list was for the Legions, for the wreaths, for Remembrance Day each year. So I don't recall that we've ever received a request from them. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we have received a request in the past for those. I also would wonder, do we have any allowance in if there were an emergency situation come up where there's a reason for somebody to be doing a fundraiser partway through the year that they weren't able to, say, have put the application in time because they weren't even aware of this having happened? So would we have any allowance for that type of thing?
So firstly, I would take away the donation of the wreaths out of this process. So really, that's not a donation. We're buying a wreath to be laid at the cenotaph on Remembrance Days and various cenotaphs throughout Grey Bruce. So I would remove that from this process. As for emergency situations, council always has the ability to make those decisions. So if there was an emergency situation that occurred outside of this process, the report would be taken to council, and it would be up to you if you want to find, money from the township to support that cause.
Thank you, Cassie. Mr. CAO, would you mind making a note of Councillor Colburn's suggestion of maybe putting a poll out and maybe follow up with it at a future meeting or whatever?
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor. I think that's a great suggestion. We'll look into it and we'll report back to council on what we're going to do and how we proceed with it.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor Carleton.
Thank you. Sorry, something I thought of in addition to. So if we are we going to allocate exactly what is requested by the end of September? Is that's all that would go in the budget? Or in the past, I think we've had a $9,000 budget line that hasn't always got spent each year. So I'm wondering, would there be an overage that maybe we could set up a small reserve fund that would cover any emergencies and maybe put a maximum upper limit of how much could be held in that reserve fund?
That is absolutely an option and decision of council. So you are correct. In the past, we have been budgeting more than we have been donating, which isn't a bad thing. And we can allocate those funds to a specific reserve fund. It'll be up to council to determine how much you want to establish each year to go to that donation line.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Councillor Barfoot, I see your hand is up. You're muted, Carol.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to clarify one thing with Madam Treasurer. So this is for this applying for a grant, and it should be to supply or get grant money towards getting a service that we do not provide, such as, we'll say, swimming lessons. Grace was another one, and I remember years ago we used to also cover swimming lessons for the handicapped, because we do not have that available. So there could be room for, say, if we don't have it now, they could apply for it though. Okay.
Yes, correct. So we're looking, and council can change this criteria, but staff feel like we're looking to support organizations that are doing good in the township and providing something that, you know, due to our capacity of township administration, we're unable to provide right now. So, you know, Grace would be a good example. It's a not-for-profit organization.
Yeah.
They provide, you know, a form of therapy to people with disabilities in our community, and that's not a service that the township offers, nor does the county, right? So that is the type of organization that meets the criteria we have established.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Go ahead, Carol.
Sorry, Mr. Mann said, Mr. CAO, someday when you have a half an hour, let me know and I'll take you down to Grace. It's something worth seeing, especially during the riding lessons. We have supported it in the past.
I agree 100%. Councillor Coburn, you have another question? I should say a follow-up. I maybe put it a different way.
That's okay. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity again, Mr. Mayor. And through you to staff, we've mentioned a couple of times the subsidies that pay for sports registrations like hockey, the non-resident fee. I know that that's separate from this donation policy, so I don't want to muddle it, but at the same time, I don't want to forget to ask what sports subsidies do we offer? I'm assuming it's more than hockey and figure skating. So for example, swimming lessons, which are not even just fun and recreational, but they're also life-saving lessons. So I wonder if, Mr. Mayor, we could ask that a quick report be brought back for folks like me. I don't know if everyone else is aware of all of the subsidies that we offer, but I certainly am not aware of them all.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn. And there's probably many I don't know either, but I see our CEO is shaking his head that he is delighted to bring back a report to council outlining all these questions we've been asking.
I think we should defer to the treasurer. It looks like she wants to provide an update, but I do not see any issue why we cannot bring a report back and provide some of that information to council.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Go ahead.
So a number of those agreements which establish those subsidies are expiring or have expired. So staff have been working on looking at those agreements and any changes that need to be made. Just to address a few of Councillor Coburn's questions, because I do have that information, it can be swimming lessons. So it's any lesson or or minor sport in which a non-resident fee is charged. So if you do swimming lessons at the YMCA, they do not charge a non-resident fee, and that's because of part of our partnership with the YMCA. But if you do hockey in Owen Sound at the same facility, the ice pads are actually Owen Sound. So yes, you would be charged a non-resident fee. So there are a few caveats to these fees, and we can certainly bring back a report detailing what is paid and how those fees were established.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. We look forward to this great report that'll be coming through. If we have no other questions on this motion before us, I'll let Cassie go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I'm just, Councillor Colburn had brought up that she'd like to see a committee established, and if that's the wish of council, I will need to revise the policy to reflect that. So I am looking for a little bit of direction if that is the wish of council, so I can update the policy prior to its approval.
I would hope, Madam Treasurer, that that would be in this report that's going to come back to council, outlining all these various things we talked about, and that is one item that we would have to address.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, but the report coming back to council is just about the subsidizing of minor sport non-resident fees. It's not about this donation policy. I have not received any direction yet to revise this policy from council. So that is what I'm looking for right now. If you wish for me to revise the policy to look at the committee structure, that's direction I need to be given.
Madam Treasurer, or Madam CEO, Madam Clerk, I'll get it right yet.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think procedurally we have to clarify a couple of things here. So there's been a lot of discussion, one about attaining feedback from the community, as well as the potential to create a committee to evaluate these applications. So what you're doing this evening by ratifying or enacting this resolution or recommendation is approving this policy. So what I'm gathering is council's not necessarily ready to approve this policy. We have more investigation to do in gathering that public feedback. So what I would recommend is we defer this report and recommendation this evening, pending feedback from the community, at which point the treasurer could present an amended version, if necessary, to council to provide any updates from which will result from that public feedback process. So that's the first.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And would the mover and the seconder agree to that suggestion to defer this motion for a future meeting? And I'm not sure who moved it, Madam Clerk.
It was moved by Carol Councillor Barfoot, and seconded by Councillor Colburn.
So if you agree, yes, I believe I see thumbs up. Okay. The floor is yours, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And further, if we could please have a show of hands in favor of the direction that we've provided to our treasurer here this evening. First being to create and advertise opportunities for public feedback regarding the donation policy. Further investigate the opportunities regarding a establishment of a committee to evaluate the application. And 3, to present a report, an informational report regarding existing sports subsidiary programs.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. All in favor of that direction, please? Show of hands, please. That is carried.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Go ahead, Councillor Barfoot.
Is that a paid committee?
Madam Treasurer?
I'm sorry, but I think you need to specifically give direction if you want a committee or not. Like, so if I bring a report back saying, yes, you could have a committee or you could not, you still have to make the decision. So if you decide you want a committee, then we could answer those questions such as Councillor Barfoot just asked, if it's a paid committee, how the committee is established, what the term of references are, etc.
Okay. Madam Clerk.
I think I'll turn it over to the CAO. He had his hand raised.
So if I may, Mr. Mayor, so I think what the clerk was recommending was right. We defer the current recommendation. We go out and we seek input from our residents in terms of whether there's a desire or not to set up a donation policy. We can also incorporate into that community engagement document or survey the desire for some membership from our ratepayers in terms of sitting on a committee, and then we can determine whether or not there's some sort of compensation. I would suggest there likely would not be any compensation, but we can certainly explore options and then bring that back to council for your consideration and direction back to staff. So we'll review all of those options and come back with some recommendations to council, and council will ultimately direct us on how you would like to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. I knew that we'd get it going back to you sooner or later, so thank you very much for doing that. Since this motion has been deferred, we'll move on then. We're down to the clerk's department. I have a recommendation here that the report LEG 2021-17 OPP paid duty summer 2021 be received for information, and that committee of the whole hereby approves funding the 10-hour shift model with costs to be funded from the COVID-19 relief fund. Someone to move to put it on the floor, please. Moved by Deputy Mayor Carlton, second by Councillor Pringle. Madam Clerk, you wish to speak to this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So as committee has in front of them this evening, staff have received a request from the OPP regarding additional paid duties to be scheduled throughout the summer months of this year. Specifically, these paid duties will be funded beyond the annual contract costs that we currently remit to the OPP on a yearly basis. These paid duties will be specific to Georgian Bluffs and will be specific to traffic-related incidences, including speed tracking throughout problematic areas throughout the township, including but not limited to Highway 6 and Gray Road 17B. Now, council does not have the opportunity to select which weekend this will apply to. It only has the opportunity to select the 8-hour shift model or the 10-hour shift model. And you will note that as included in this report, we are recommending the 10-hour shift model just to ensure a greater, more consistent presence throughout the township throughout the course of these paid duties. At their meeting yesterday, being June 8th, the Police Services Board did support approval of the 10-hour shift model, being $5,160. Those costs will be funded from the COVID-19 Relief Fund, as the OPP has planned these additional duties in response to additional or increased traffic throughout the area.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Just so council knows, that at our Police Service Board meeting, I did ask the sergeant at the time, could they please collect as much data as they possibly could during this process, so we'd have it for future reference to see how process worked and so on and so forth. So it'd be good data to have for future, and they had no problem doing that for us. Does council have any, council have any questions? Councillor Barfoot? You muted, Carol?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Also, when they're providing that extra information for you, it would be nice to know how all the confusion over the 24th of May weekend and short-term rentals and cottages and parties and everything else cost us, because I don't know about the rest of council, but I got a couple phone calls, and of course I gave Mr. CAO's email address out. I just forwarded it on, but how much did that cost us? And talking about paid duty, it sort of irks me that how much did our contract go up this year? And it's nice to know there's COVID funding covering this, but paid duty, I don't know. I would have thought they would do their job regardless.
Thank you, Councilor Barfoot. Deputy Mayor Carlton, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with Councillor Barfoot. I would look on it as it's kind of part of their duty. So it's good that it's being covered by the COVID funding. But did they not do this same thing a year ago? And I thought we did this exact same thing, took part in paying for 1 weekend of extra overtime a year ago. So did we get any data back from last year?
Deputy Mayor Carlton, I do not remember us doing that before, but I could be wrong. Madam Clerk, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Deputy Mayor, for the question. According to our records and to the best of my knowledge, we have not participated in a paid duty program, at least for the past 3 years. I will say that the interim detachment commander, being Commander Anderson, is very much a data-driven commander. So I do anticipate that detailed reports will be provided to each council and through to each police services board as well.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Councillor Barfoot, go ahead.
Yeah, we better be billed at an overtime or at a paid duty time, not as overtime.
Okay. Good comment. Madam Clerk, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just a point on that, I will note that the OPP is waiving administration fees as well as the car associated fees that would normally be charged for a duty such as this. And you are correct, Councillor Barfoot, we will not be charged at an overtime rate, simply at an hourly rate.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Councillor Barfoot, I see your virtual hand is still up. Another question or no?
No. No.
Okay.
No.
Good. If we have no other questions or comments on this motion before us, show of hands, all in favor of the motion before us? I believe it's carried. Madam Clerk, can you confirm it was carried?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just invite those to indicate their vote in opposition. So if you are opposed to the motion, please raise your hand. So you are correct, Mr. Mayor, that did carry.
Thank you. Okay, moving off our agenda. That report, LEG 2021-18 Community Safety and Wellbeing Planning Revised Municipal Agreement Initiative Update be received, and that Township Clerk Brittany Drury be hereby reappointed as the Township's representative on the Community Safety and Wellbeing Advisory Committee, and that a bylaw to authorize the revised municipal participation agreement be presented at the June 16th, 2021 meeting of council. Someone to move to put it on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Pringle, second by Councillor Barfoot. Madam Clerk, you wish to speak to this? You're getting another job.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So as council will recall, changes to the Police Services Act, which came into effect in 2019, require each lower tier municipality to create and adopt a community safety and well-being plan. Since 2019, myself, I have participated in joint discussions throughout the Grey Bruce counties. As you'll recall, this joint plan was just that, a joint effort throughout all of the lower tiers throughout both Grey and Bruce counties, with the exception of the municipality of Meaford. And again, as you will recall, in 2020, specifically December 2020, the plan was formally adopted by this council and all other lower tiers following its presentation. So now that the plan has been adopted, we move into the action table phase of implementation of the plan. So again, as you will recall, in 2019, upon commencement of these joint discussions, we signed a joint participation agreement with all of the lower tiers as well as the 2 counties. As we're now moving into a different phase of the planning process, being the action phase, the agreement, the participation agreement specifically requires amending just to reflect moving into a different phase. So all you're doing this evening is giving me direction to bring a bylaw back to the June 16th council meeting to enact that agreement. And the second portion of this report speaks to representation on the committee, which I'm recommending remain as myself. Council does have the opportunity to appoint an additional member to that committee. However, the committee is very large, given that there's almost 60 representatives, just organizations. There could be multiple representatives from each organization. So it is quite a large group already. That would be my only hesitation in appointing another member. But with that being said, council has every opportunity to participate should they wish to. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Comments from or questions from council? Seeing none, good report. A show of hands, all in favor of the recommendation. The motion is carried. Moving off our agenda, we're down to our next recommendation. That report LEG 2021-19 closed session and electronic participation policy review be received, and the committee provide direction to staff regarding electronic participation attendance requirement in meetings outside of an emergency period, and that section 2.4 of electronic participation policy COU 02-2020 be hereby amended to permit voting by show of hands where possible in electronic meetings during an emergency period. Someone to move to put it on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Barfoot, second by Councillor Coburn. By passing this motion, that means that the mayor is overworked again. Comments from council?
Mr. Mayor, if I may, if I could just provide a brief overview, as I know this was a very lengthy report and included a lot of detail. So this report has been presented as both of these policies were new to council and they have been implemented for approximately a year each now. So it's time to evaluate their real life applications around the council horseshoe. So section 1 addresses our closed session policy, which we adopted in early 2020 and has been in effect ever since. The reason for enacting that policy was to provide guidance in circulation of electronic confidential materials, which we continue to work into our practices today. As you'll note in this report, I've overviewed the regulations regarding voting in closed session, what that means, what the limitations are. The limitations are very strict in that it's only for procedural matters and for giving direction to staff. At this time, I don't feel any amendments are needed to that policy. But if council feels differently, we can certainly take it away and try to fine tune any wording that you would see fit. So, Mr. Mayor, if you're okay with it, I would like to structure this conversation into 2 sections. So first, if we could take comments regarding the closed session policy, and then we'll move on to the electronic participation policy.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Councillor Coburn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Clerk Drury. That was an informative and helpful reminder of some of the policies we have in place. A couple of questions around closed session. Well, actually, one comment and one question. I do note that the Ombudsman is recommending, and I would like to see us follow suit in doing recordings of closed session as we do our open sessions. So I would just like to go on the record in saying that I hope we can move towards that. I think that's best practice, even though it's not required of us at this time. And secondly, I would just say too about voting. The report covers the voting in closed session really well. But again, the Ombudsman does go on to say that even polling members of council, sort of a straw poll or it's kind of a loosey-goosey show of hands to get a perception is considered a vote, and we should also steer clear of that. So that's just a comment, and I wonder how you feel about moving towards taping of closed sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn. Madam Clerk, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Coburn, for the comments. I will say that as included in the 2021 budget, we are moving towards audio recordings of all closed sessions. I will have a report ready for Committee of the Whole in July to get that process going. In regards to your second question, you are correct. The Ombudsman is quite clear that informal polling in closed session still constitutes an illegal vote. So where council does take a vote in closed session, it has to strictly apply to procedural direction or direction to staff. When council does vote in closed session, it should be a formal vote done by resolution, formally taken by either recorded vote or show of hands. None of this informal, not fancy business.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Is there any other questions on the in-camera section of this report? If none, okay, the floor is open to other questions. Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we can now move on to the second portion of this report, which outlines the electronic participation policy. So as council will recall, we created and adopted this policy in 2020 in anticipation of the COVID-19 pandemic releasing. Of course, we are still in that situation today, but in preparation for what we can hope for lightening of COVID-19 regulations, I thought it was time to reevaluate this participation policy and see how it might fit for this council in moving beyond the emergency period that we are currently in, given the COVID-19 pandemic. So as it stands, there are attendance restrictions in participating electronically beyond an emergency period. So upon cessation of the COVID-19 emergency period, council will be restricted in how many meetings they may participate electronically in. There's also restrictions regarding how many sequential meetings you can participate electronically in. So at this time, I would invite comments or direction from council. If you'd like to see this loosened, staff are supportive of doing so. I think we've all proven that we can function very well in a virtual horseshoe. So if council would like to see this continue, then we can definitely look at other options that may be less restrictive, whether that's a 50% allotment or a complete opening of electronic participation. If council decides to do so, and as is reflective in the recommendation this evening, staff can look at other options that may be less restrictive to permit council to continue to participate electronically.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Before I go to Councillor Coburn, I'm still a firm believer that I would like to see us use our council chambers whenever we can, as soon as we can. Yes, virtual meetings are great, but I still miss that human contact and to be able to see the expressions on a person's body and face instead of looking at a virtual screen. That's just my comment. Councillor Coburn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, just to respond to Brittany's request for feedback, I would too like to see the restrictions loosened. I think we've seen tremendous success over the last year, not only with council, but the ratepayers. Do you remember 2 years ago when we used to complain that nobody came to council chambers? It was like a ghost town. We would sit there and no matter what we tried to do, nobody participated by coming in person. And yet over the last year, we've seen more public engagement and attendance at our meetings than ever before. So I personally would love to see Councillor Sutherland tuning into meetings virtually on his tractor while he gets his crops put in. I think the more accessible we can be, I think that's really important. And I think it's important for future applicants for council positions. I would love to see more people who are maybe tied to an office environment during meeting times, or perhaps they're at home and they're looking after an aging relative in the home and they can't get away. I would love to be able to open up the pool of applicants for municipal council by making the job as accessible as possible and not putting any restrictions on folks. Now, if we had 100 people saying we're going to show up in person in the council chambers because of a very important issue that affects a lot of people and we want our council to be there, then of course we would want to be there in person. But I just don't see any benefit to making things less accessible in a world where we're trying to make things more accessible. And that's my input. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Colburn. Just so you know, the council chambers are still very lonely because I'm sitting in here all by myself. Deputy Mayor Carlton, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question. I thought one of the things that we were doing was trying to get away from doing the recorded votes. But when I'm reading the policy, section 2 is still reading that all votes will be considered recorded votes and conducted manually by the clerk or their designate. Is that not the section we were trying to get changed, or am I reading this wrong?
Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Deputy Mayor, for pointing that out. So what you're doing this evening, and by approving this recommendation this evening, is you're giving me direction to amend that. So what you're seeing right now is the policy as it currently stands. But by adoption of this recommendation this evening, I will take the policy away and do that amendment. When we adopted this policy, we did delegate amending authorities to myself. So upon council's direction and upon approval of this recommendation, I'll take the policy away and make the necessary changes to that section specifically, being 2.4. And Mr. Mayor, if I may, while I have the floor, I just wanted to note that I think the electronic participation piece can be done in a hybrid model. By potentially loosening the restrictions, I'm by no means suggesting we continue all virtual all the time for the remainder of time. I'm simply suggesting maybe we reevaluate those restrictions and look at ways to make it flexible while still having a presence in the council chambers. Now, I don't have a eureka solution to that yet, but should council direct me to investigate further through adoption of this recommendation this evening, I will do so and present any suggested amendments or potential options for incorporation into this policy.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, for those kind words. That it'd be nice to see council members in the council chambers again with me. Mr. CAO, any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would only echo the comments that I'm hearing. I think we all miss the in-person and sort of being able to look each other in the eyes and sort of talk and read body language. But I also believe that, you know, if COVID's done anything, it's really accelerated our move to more virtual, more accessible situations, such as virtual council meetings, allowing those who are otherwise unable to attend council meetings to actually attend, whether you're a councillor and you're juggling your personal life with your work life, whether you're a ratepayer who would want to participate but can't get out to the township offices on a council meeting. The virtual option allows us to provide that flexibility. And to repeat what the clerk said, we're not, the recommendation or sort of the thought is we're not mandating one or the other. What we're thinking is the policy should allow that flexibility so that if for whatever reason the agenda dictates and a council member determines that they should be in council chambers for a particular meeting, they have that option. If they've got other commitments and it's more convenient for them to attend virtually, they've got that option. And I think that's where we're really headed towards, is sort of a hybrid model where we're allowing as much accessibility and as much flexibility as we can to allow the business of the township to proceed in an efficient and effective manner. And I think that's what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you, Mr. CEO, and good comments. And I do agree with what you're saying. Any other comments from council? Seeing none, a show of hands, all in favor of the recommendation? I did read the recommendation, did I not, Madam Clerk?
So I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, if I may ask, is the recommendation to give staff direction to go back and rework that policy? Is that, I'm not sure what I'm voting on at the moment. I'm sorry.
You want me to reread the motion again? I certainly can. I'll read the motion again. It says that report LEG 2021-19, closed session and electronic participation policy review be received, and that committee provide direction to staff regarding electronic participation attendance requirements in meetings outside of an emergency period, and that section 2.4 of electronic participation policy COU 02-2020 be hereby amended to permit voting by a show of hands where possible in electronic meetings during an emergency period. That's what the motion we were voting on. And Madam Clerk, does that not give you direction to do exactly what you were suggesting you'd like to try and do?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And yes, I have received appropriate feedback to take this policy back and review how we could better incorporate some flexibility into that policy. So I will take that direction away and report back.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I can ask for a show of hands again. All in favor of the recommendation before us? I believe okay is carried. Okay. We're down to human resources. The recommendation is that report HR 2021-03, HR 2018-04 employee recognition policy be received for information, and that bylaw number 31/2009 Christmas party policy be repealed, and that HR 2018-04 employee recognition policy is hereby approved, and that the same be incorporated in the existing human resources policy manual. Someone to move to put it on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Coburn, second by Councillor Barfoot. And Ms. Hills, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So on November 4th, 2020, Council directed staff to update the current Christmas party policy to a staff recognition policy. The intent of this change was to move the length of service and staff appreciation awards and events to the last council meeting of the year. This change required a revision to the employee recognition policy. So this revision has been made, and I also took the liberty to review the entire policy. And while doing so, I noticed a lack of procedures. So for the sake of clarity, I also included a new set of procedures into the policy. And then from there, it got staff talking about the Christmas party policy. And so therefore, staff are supporting the repeal of bylaw 31-2009, as it does not support an inclusive work environment. The township management team will, of course, continue to explore and consider staff appreciation and team building events throughout the year. So I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Comments or questions from council? Seeing none, Janet, good report. All those in favor of the recommendation before us, a show of hands, please. The motion is carried. So moving on for agenda, public questions. Madam Clerk, was there any questions come in from the public?
There was none.
Unfinished business, we've none. New business. Madam Clerk, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I just wanted to highlight for council's information that effective June 11th, being this Friday, the province of Ontario is entering the first step of the 3-phased reopening system. So under the first step of said reopening plan, the township administration offices will reopen for collection of payments only. Now, staff remain available through video conference or through telephone to assist the public. And now that the weather is getting nicer, we can start to entertain outdoor appointments to serve the public. Glass barriers and a type of buzzer system have been installed at the front door of the administration office. That was installed prior to this last round of lockdown. So staff have control over how many people come into the lobby at once. It will be restricted to one person at a time. Additionally, effective June 14th, the same day the office will reopen for collection of payments only, bag tags will start to be required on all curbside waste. As you'll recall, due to the stay-at-home order, we did waive that requirement. It has been waived since April, since we went into the stay-at-home order. Additionally, outdoor gatherings are limited to 10 people effective Friday. Campsites are permitted to be open. Overnight camping at Ontario Parks is permitted. And as we continue to receive more updates, we will continue to update council and the public regarding how the changes will impact the township. But at this time, all council meetings will remain virtual. I don't anticipate moving to a hybrid system until approximately the third step of reopening. And just as another tidbit of information, each step will remain in effect for at least 21 days.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, for that update. Does council have any questions? Councilor Barfoot, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Madam Clerk, quick question. Somebody asked me, any word on hazardous waste, if they'll be starting it up again? Thank you.
Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Councillor Barfoot. And we actually received notification today that the June hazardous waste event would be canceled. So we will keep our fingers crossed for the fall event, but as of right now, they do continue to be canceled.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Clerk, for that update. So I'll move on to our agenda. Is there any notice of motions coming forward from any council member? See none. We are now going to go into closed session. I have a recommendation here that the committee of the whole move into closed session at 6:14 p.m. with the township CAO, HR manager, clerk, to discuss one, personal matters about identifiable individual, including local board or municipal employees. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Deputy Mayor Carlton, second by Councilor Pringle. Let's show of hands, all in favor. We are now going to closed session, so please go out of this screen and go into the other one.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, we are now live. Please go ahead. Mr. Mayor, you are muted.
I thought it was perfect. Committee went into closed session to discuss matters under open meeting exemption via section 239 of the Municipal Act. As a result of closed discussions, the following actions were taken. 1, receive for information, no further action was taken. Our next regular meeting will be, says June 2nd, 2020. If I copy that, must be wrong. Our next meeting is June
16th.
16th, sorry. June 16th at 5 p.m. If we no other business here tonight, I need someone to move adjournment. Moved by Councillor Colburn, second by Councillor Thompson. Show of hands, all in favor of adjournment. We is carried. We're now adjourned. Thanks everybody for a great meeting.